talk about the matches from last week. A number of them, I mean, we were in two locations last week. I was over at Garaway. Wasn't much of a contest between the Pirates and the East Knox Bulldogs. It was a 42-7 game that had a running clock throughout the entirety of the second half. The other game, though, was one of the closest matchups we've seen Canton South in all season. And somehow they staved off the Griffins of Akron Bookdale High School. That was a very interesting matchup.
It was such an entertaining game. And it came down to the wire, right? That's what you like as a fan of high school football. Now, if you're a Canton South player, coach, or parent, probably don't like it when it's that close and it comes down to the final possession. But 27-26 win, Canton South did everything they needed to do, Mitch, to hang on and secure that victory, to remain unbeaten and keep their season alive as they move on now to round 3 of the high school playoffs. And there were times Canton South looked great. There were times that Canton South, I think, for the most part this year, looked like, oh, wait, they are human. Because I mean, I think for the most part this year, Mitch, we've seen Canton South kind of run the table. They've flexed their muscles on a lot of teams, but we touched on it before the game last week. We knew Bookdale was going to be able to give them a test, right? That as a team, despite the record, they were better than what the record indicated, and they are full of athletes all over the field. But Poochie Snyder and the Wildcats did exactly what they needed to do. They converted on some big time plays throughout that second half. And Mitch, they really trusted their defense, which I feel like at times this year, there was times we talked about the defense not being that strong for Canton South. Well, they showed up when they needed them most. They got numerous stops on fourth down with Bookdale trying to keep the game alive. And they got that final stop. Poochie Snyder comes out, takes a knee, and Canton South is still unbeaten and moving on. You mentioned it. They'll be at Louisville this week where they will take on the West Branch Warriors, and that will be a dandy. The winner looking to go to the regional final, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
I mean,
and,
yeah.
Hats off to Canton South.
I mean, you talk about that defense, Savon Castle making one of the plays of the night with an early fourth quarter interception. And then he would go on to catch the game winning touchdown on an 8-yard pass with 10:18 left in the fourth quarter. That was the 116th, by the way, career touchdown for Poochie Snyder, the Wildcats quarterback, who now ties former Sandy Valley quarterback Cameron Blair for the Stark County all-time record with 116 career passing scores. Snyder also ran for another touchdown while throwing for 15 of 26 passing, 189 yards. 121 yards on the ground, 16 carries. I mean, the guy is just putting up these crazy numbers for this team that is really having one special run. And we'll see this coming Friday if they're able to win their upcoming matchup, which again will be against West Branch. That will be at Louisville High School on Friday. Myself and Dave Sheets will be there on call so check us out there. I mean, yeah, there was a number of other teams, obviously, who are moving on. Obviously, the Massillon Tigers, continuing to dominate in this postseason. They've outscored their first two playoff opponents, Mitch, 91-13. And and this is one of the craziest stats. They've outscored teams 490-95 overall, which is, unbelievable. And then you get to play one of your local teams. You get to play your Federal League counterpart, because they're not in the Federal League, Lake, the Blue Streaks. After the Blue Streaks, Mitch, had this unbelievable victory or this very hard-earned victory this Friday.
The Lake and Sunbury Big Walnut game, Mitch. At times when I checked that score, I thought, oh, nobody must be over there right now to be able to give us a real score. Oh, maybe there's a delay. Oh, maybe the lights went out. No, Mitch, it was 0-0 after regulation when they went into overtime. And then all chaos ensued because these two teams finally found the end zone, and it shapes up with Lake walking away a triple overtime or double
overtime?
Triple overtime winner to keep their season alive. I mean, I've talked about the Lake defense a lot this year. Are you now buying that the Lake defense is pretty good after they held their opponents scoreless through the first four quarters? But Sunbury Big Walnuts defense also did what it had to do. And realistically, Mitch, I think that's where maybe home field advantage becomes such a factor, that you win in triple overtime in a game that was 0-0 after regulation. And Lake keeps their season alive, and it's one round shorter than last year, but my, oh my, look what we have here. because last year we had Lake against Massillon in that regional final all the way up at Parma Byers Field. What was some wonderful weather that you and I got to cover
Oh,
that game.
yeah, it was great
just
standing on that
amazing.
sideline.
I think I'm still cold from that game over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't be that cold this weekend. Knock on wood. Lake is going to have their hands full. And that's about as nicely as you can put it, because this Massillon team, Mitch, for the first time in a few years, I'm going to say has this different look. This team is always very talented. This team is always very good. That is why they continuously get to the state championship game, the state semifinals, the regional final, all of what the past 3, 4, 5 seasons have been. Mm-hmm. This team is different. There's a different feel to this team. There's a different look to this team. And I think it starts with DeJuan Owens. We've talked about it all season long. Head coach Nate Moore is relying on that senior quarterback, and he has taken this Massillon Tigers team to new heights. Now, he plays quarterback. He doesn't play on the other side of the ball, but the Massillon defense is just as good as their offense. They've given up 13 points in 2 playoff games, but they've also only given up 95 points all year for a 12-0 team. Mm-hmm. They have a plus 395 point differential.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know the last time we've seen it. Now, obviously it could have happened recently and I just don't see it often, but I mean it's crazy. And so this Lake defense, Mitch, is going to have to play the best game of their entire lives. Yeah. Every single player that plays on the defensive side of the football, starters, reserves, guys that don't typically play that might have to come in if an injury happens. This is going to have to be the greatest game defensively Lake's ever played. And Lake offense, they cannot turn the ball over, because what does Massillon do as soon as they get a turnover? They go down the field and score. It's hard to stop this Massillon team. So much like last week where I talked about Glen Oak before they played St. Ed's is going to have to control the clock. This is going to have to be a control the clock game for Lake immediately. If they win the coin toss and they get that football first, they are going to have to do whatever they can to move the ball, chew up clock, because this Massillon team can score in one play, whether it's through the air or on the ground.
No, I mean, Lake is going to have a task ahead of it on defense, and give credit to Massillon's defense as well. You mentioned those numbers. They're only averaging about 7.9 points per game given up all season. I mean, Lake's at 14.6 right now, which is very admirable, of course. It's that offense that really, you talk about that defense, the offense really needs to step up. Nate Baker needs to have like at least 3 touchdowns in order for them to have a fighter's chance. And that's going to be difficult against this Tigers squad that has looked dominant against pretty much everybody all season. There's only been maybe that one close game just back in the early on in the season. And, you know, I could see Lake even if they don't perform perfectly, I could see Massillon scoring around 28 points. And that unfortunately could be enough for them, as you know, Lake has kind of struggled to put the ball in the end zone otherwise in this postseason against the likes of Perry and then last week as well. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. The winner of that game will play the winner of one of our other BTS games this week, Canal Winchester versus Green, of course, at Dover's Crater Stadium. The Bulldogs, they look pretty solid throughout the postseason. They get a 31-7 win over Hoover. They had Semino Manson kind of back in the mix. He had 3 touchdowns for 100 some yards, or 100 however many was passing yards. Zach Bagley has caught a touchdown in 8 straight games so far this year. He has 13 on the season. Antonio Martin's doing what he has to do. I mean, this looks like a Green team that can do a lot of good things, but they're going to be taking on their rushing defense is going to have a test this week, because Canal Winchester does nothing but run the football almost.
Yeah. I mean, but you mentioned the Green defense. They have only allowed 14 points in the last 14 quarters when it's the first string defense out there. We're talking about the Massillon defense. We're talking about the Lake defense. We're talking about all these other defenses, Canton South defense. It's time we give Green the respect they deserve defensively, because this team, when their first string defense is out there, Mitch, has been stout. Teams are not moving the ball on them. Teams are not scoring on them. We look back to what they did against Lake in that week 10 matchup during rivalry week. Offensively, Green, I think, kind of found something there. And that was still without quarterback Semino Manson back yet. He just returned during the playoffs from that broken collarbone from week 5. And he knocked his rust off pretty quickly. It looks like you mentioned 3 touchdowns. I believe he had 124 passing yards last week. But the Green defense, all of a sudden, Mitch, Green in general, is playing complementary football. If the offense can't get it going, the defense is keeping it going. If the defense isn't having it, the offense will go get it. But right now, it's neither, because both are firing at all cylinders. And looking back at it and reading what's happening, this is the healthiest Green has been, Mitch. People are saying since week 3 of the season. Mm-hmm. And this is a team that started off 3-0 before they lost to Jackson. They had a couple key injuries there. Canal Winchester might be the number 2 seed, might only have 1 loss. When you look back at Green's season, when you look at some of the losses they had and why they had them, including losing a quarterback at McKinley in the first half, this is a team that I think if Samino Manson plays all year, they're probably right here in terms of record with Canal Winchester. But at the same time, if you're Green, I think you learned a lot more about your team this year when you face the adversity with Samino Manson going down, other players going down, other players having to step up and rise to the occasion. That helps you with the momentum you have right now rolling into this game. Because now, if somebody isn't getting it done, you can count on somebody else. And so for all the people out there that say, oh, they should have won that game in the regular season, oh, it's a bad loss. Sure, at the time it is. But it builds other players up, it builds the character up, and it allows people to find their footing. And I think that's where Green is right now. And Mitch, they are a team that is just hot right now. And so they're going to have their hands full with Canal Winchester. You mentioned this is a team that runs the football, and they run it extremely well. I like Green, though. I think Green has a real fighter's chance here to win this game and get back to the regional final for the first time in 2 or 3 seasons when they defeated Massillon.
That defensive line is going to be an interesting case study for Friday. I'm wondering how the secondary is going to operate, because a number of these guys have done very well this season. Josh Just, he's a senior safety. He has 6 interceptions. You have guys like Martin who have 5 interceptions on the year. I wonder if Canal is not going to pass the ball very much in that game, how they're going to be utilized in the defense. Nevertheless, they are trying to get to the regionals for the second time in the last 3 years, while Winchester is looking for the first time it's ever won 3 games in a postseason. So we'll see what happens there. And of course, we have the Canton McKinley St. Ed's game this coming Friday. McKinley, look, I have friends who went to Ignatius. They were heartbroken is a word, to say the least, about what happened on Friday night. And, the Bulldogs did what they had to do. They scored the touchdown. Keith Quincy had the interception to seal the game. But, McKinley's seeking their first regional final appearance since 2009. I mean, this taking down the 2-time defending Division I champs, who have shut out their first 2 opponents, including Glen Oak this past week. That's a hard test for any Bulldogs team to have to overcome.
Not only have they won the past 2 state championships, Mitch, they look poised to win their 3rd consecutive. I mean, St. Ed's is on a whole nother level. You look at their record, you look at the fact they're 11-1. Their 1 loss was to Massillon this year, which is, the number 1 team in Division II in the state of Ohio. McKinley's going to have their hands full, and they will be traveling up to Parma to play St. Ed's. At the same time, this isn't about the prettiest. This is not about the flashiest. This is about who's going to get their nose to the football and who's going to hit harder and who's going to play more discipline. I think at times this year we've seen McKinley play disciplined football. I think at times this year you've seen the complete opposite. And what is the focus level at Camp McKinley this week? Where are these kids' heads at? Are the coaches talking positively in a manner of which, hey, yeah, you have to give St. Ed's credit, right? They're the defending 2-time state champs. You have to mention that. They're beatable. They 100% are beatable. Are they feeding positive thoughts into the McKinley players' heads, which I would have to assume they are? That's part of your job as a coach. But if McKinley can start to believe and buy in, and that game is close after the first quarter, and that game is close into the second half, all of a sudden, I feel like you start to get this uneasy feeling if you're St. Ed's. And if McKinley just gets 1 play to break their way, this Bulldogs team might be finding themselves in the regional final for the first time since 2009. This team is littered with athletes. This team is littered with talent. They don't have the big name, flashy commitments like St. Ed's, who has a Notre Dame recruit at linebacker who has 8 sacks and 22.5 tackles for loss and 4 forced fumbles. All right, I think I'm done with the stat line there. But you do have players that can make big time plays. And Mitch, I think about when you and I went, I believe week 2 to watch Avon, right? That was a game that McKinley was not disciplined. How many times did we see wide open receivers drop passes where they could have just ran to the end zone? At least 2 times. I saw it against Jackson, a game in which Coach Hall said they were more lucky than good. You watch the game against Massillon. They were not good. But at the same time, for every time this team comes down, this team comes up. Can they stay on the rise? Because I think McKinley does have a fighter's chance here. It's going to be hard. There's no doubt about that. You're going against a team that's outscored their opponent 77-0, like you mentioned. So can Keaton Road take care of that football? There's times he has, there's times he hasn't. It's all dependent on how disciplined McKinley can stay and how positive they get, especially if St. Ed strikes quickly, which is very, very possible.